And I'm going to go over just some basic principles to keep in mind because your visual design is very important. It's probably more important than anything else because if it doesn't look good, if your site doesn't look good, if it's not inviting, it doesn't matter what your content is or how important you are or how important your site is, people don't want to stay. And you have to really think about how visual cues work on your site to keep people engaged. So this is the little description I put in our program today. Basic principles of design, how they apply to web design, including considerations of balance, hierarchy, and color, as well as the density and appropriate use of text and images. Now, I thought I would start by talking about signs, because I think signs, and the way we look at signs, has a lot, it's kind of similar to how we approach websites. We want signs to be clear and to the point. We don't want anything about them to be useless. We don't want them to be confusing, and we don't usually have a lot of time to look at them. So here's an example, some bad signs. I have no idea what the one on the left is supposed to mean. The one on the right, maybe you're not supposed to read while you're driving. I don't know, but it's not really that clear. And here are some other signs that cause instant confusion. So imagine people arriving at your website and freezing because they don't know what to do, where to go, or what to think. It's the same with these signs. Some signs are not placed in the right, not placed correctly. Here we have two signs that are contradicting one another. Obviously, if the bottom sign was placed somewhere else, it would be more clear. This is the kind of thing that can happen on your website too, causing confusion. This is my favorite because by the time you've read it, you've hit the bridge and you're dead. So it's not that there's anything wrong with the sign, but it's in the wrong place. So it's very important where things are placed in your website too. You want to give people the right information in the right place at the right time. This, I assume you're supposed to read while you're driving by. And my only solution for this would be to break it up. There's probably too much text on here anyway. You might have to break it up into more than one sign, which, if it were a website, you'd break it up into several pages, and you'd have some kind of hierarchy established as to what you want to read first and what's not that important. And here's, I don't know if you recognize this from Harry Potter, too many signs is not good either, because they have the effect of canceling one another out, and you don't want to read any of them. Same here, you're probably sitting at the stoplight for a few seconds. There's nobody organizing these signs, and therefore it's very confusing. It produces anxiety, and you're not likely to follow any of them. Here's an example of how you can organize a sign. On the left we have a lot of different signs about different times of day you're allowed to park and not allowed to park, and it's a little bit Byzantine looking, and what they did on the right, I think, is more successful. It's visually pleasing. Right away you see the red areas. That's when you're not supposed to park there. So even when you have a lot of information that's complicated, don't despair. It doesn't mean you have to give up on it. There's a way to organize it and make it look good. Here are a couple signs that I think are organized very well. Notice on the left, it doesn't say this is a bike path. It just has a picture of a bike. You know it's a bike path. You can use visual cues like that. You can use icons. You can use images. The mileage is always in the same area in a column. So is the time that it takes to get there. So that's a way of organizing this too. The one on the right is very nicely done. It uses one color as a background. It's very clear. There's no confusion. And here too we have two lists. Notice there aren't any bullets on those lists. I'm kind of a person that doesn't think bullets are that necessary. You can use spacing instead. If you see the list on the right, the last item, Chinese Tamil collection, takes up 2 lines. But there's more space between that and the other items. That's your list. That's why you don't need bullet points. If all those were compressed together, you might need a bullet point, but you see where bullet points came from. They were trying to lead your eye where there's not enough spacing between the items. But if you have the spacing, you don't need the bullet points. So keep in mind those signs, the bad signs, and how they relate to your websites. The most important thing is to consider your visual hierarchy. Your visual hierarchy means that you have priorities and you're relating those priorities to other people. If you don't have priorities, you need to sit down and think about them, as Adriana as explained in the last session here. And you can reflect your priorities in the font sizes that you pick, where you place images, and the way you use text and images consistently across pages to categorize information. You can see visual hierarchy's been around for a long time. It's old cave painting. One deer is bigger than the other ones obviously means that deer is more desirable. So, visual hierarchy means you use elements to lead people, to tell people where they should look first, then second, then third. An element could be text, it could be an image, it could be a logo. All those things are elements. Here's an example of how text can work in a visual hierarchy. You're telling people what they should see first, and then second, and then what's important after that, if they have time to read it. This is very important if your website gets a little visually complicated, you can uncomplicate it by having this kind of hierarchy and consistency in the levels of hierarchy. So the way you create consistency, you have headers, different kinds of headers, a level 1, a level 2, level 3. You have a body text that always looks consistent from page to page. You have main text. You might have insets. Every time you have an inset across your website, it always looks the same. Consistency is very important. For instance, on this page, you can see where the headers are. They're introducing those paragraphs of text. Here's another page, completely different page in that website. Do you see the way the headers and text, it looks the same. People expect a hierarchy to be the same from page to page throughout your website. So if you look at this site just for a few moments and just think to yourself, what do you see first? What do you see second? What do you see third? There's a hierarchy established here. I'll tell you what I see. First, I see, whoops, that's not coming up. There you go. I see the title. Then I see this image. Then I see these three main categories. Then I see this red thing that says read more. Then I'm going to read this quote at the bottom. Then probably I'll see the logo. And lastly, whoops, I would delve deeper into these three categories. So first you snag people, you tell them what to see first. You don't, if all those little categories had big text, you'd kind of be overwhelmed. You'd think, I have to read this all at once. I don't want to do that. I want to know generally what this site's about first before I dig deeper. As opposed to this page, it's not really clear what you're supposed to look at first. It's a little bit visually confusing. I would say that the hierarchy is not cleanly established here. So that's why I'm not even going to go there. This one too, we've got a lot of different images. I'm not sure where I should look first. First I see the name of the university, and then I see all the images at once. And then it's like, do I want to connect with Caltech, or should I go into one of these images? If I go into one of these images, which one should I go into? I'm a little bit confused here. I don't think the hierarchy is that clear. Same here. This is kind of a visual mess. You don't know where they want you to look first or where they want you to go. And color is working against this too. I'll talk about that later. Okay, this site I think has a really good visual hierarchy, and it even has a dotted line showing you where you should go, from one thing to the next. So, you're seeing the title, and then you see these. It's leading your eye. And you might look down here because that's kind of prominent. And then lastly, you dig deep into each of those categories. Same here, you're seeing this first. And that's kind of giving you a clue about what you're supposed to feel about this site. And then you see this. Then you might want to schedule a consultation already. And then you see the logo, this information at the bottom. So talking about text, text you should only put in there what's absolutely essential. Less is more. You want to focus people. Adriana and Julianne just talked about this too. In a site like this, Probably a lot of older sites look kind of like this. They just kind of dumped everything in there. And aside from not having a clear hierarchy, it's overwhelming. People don't read web pages the way they read other things. That people have short attention spans. They want things to be consistent and very clear from the start. Here's another one that has a lot of text. Even though they tried to break it up, it's still a little bit overwhelming. I would say this would be more successful if these were broken up into separate pages and categories. Like this one is. You have these categories that are clearly marked at the bottom. Each one has a little bit of text and invites you to dig deeper into them. Visually, it's organized because you have these boxes behind those categories at the bottom, and they're actually using colors too to help set those off. This one is well organized also. It's dense, but not too much, and there's text in the middle. It looks kind of dense, but you really don't have to go there first. That's at the bottom of the hierarchy, I would say. That's for people that really want to dig in. So you can see it's not like you can't have text on your website. It's just a matter of when you want people to go there, and they should have a choice about that. This one is very clean. It has 3 main categories and 3 lists. It's not overwhelming at all, so it's very inviting. Talking about fonts, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this. There are basically 2 types of fonts, serif fonts and sans serif fonts. Serifs are those little thin and thick areas of letters, like you see the T in Times, how the top of it comes down to a point, and at the bottom has these little legs. They're called serifs. They were developed when people were, with the printing presses, creating newspapers. Those things actually help move your eye along in the text. That's why they were created. Sans serif fonts are cleaner. The lines don't have those little weighted areas. So Helvetica is a very common sans serif font. And for the web, you probably could use either, but the sans serif fonts tend to work better because they're backlit. And when you have the serif fonts, especially when they're smaller, some of those lighter areas tend to blow out. So I think that sans serif fonts might be a better choice for the web. Leading is the space between lines, so you can either tighten it or spread it out a bit. As far as how much leading to use, you have to use your judgment about it. Usually if you have fewer lines, you can get away with more leading. Nobody wants to read a whole page with this giant leading spread out. Similarly, if it's too tight, it's more like a newspaper, and as we said, reading the web is not like reading a newspaper, so you don't want to do that either. Tracking is the space between letters in a line. So you see this phrase, the next chapter, the tracking is spread out. I don't know if this is always easy to do on the web, right, Michael? There might be a problem with that. But it's more appropriate, for headings and subheadings and things like that. You don't want to read a whole paragraph like that either. Kerning, by contrast, is a space just between 2 letters, not a whole line. So I don't know if you've noticed that the Yale word mark, they kern the Y and the A. They reduce that space a little bit. That's called kerning, just between 2 letters. That's the difference between tracking and kerning. When you're emphasizing something, you only need to use one variable. It could be, color, bold, italic, underline, although you should avoid that because people will think it's a link. It might not be. In case all caps, small caps. There's a bad example of emphasis at the bottom. It's using too many of those things. You only need one. And if you're using a lot of these, even though I'm using only one form of emphasis each time, there's so many things emphasized in this sentence that nothing is emphasized. It all cancels out. As opposed to this, I just said the word nothing is emphasized, and you're probably more likely to remember this in this sentence than something like that. You've probably all received emails like this at some point or another. And now I'd like to talk about images. Images can convey a lot of information. They can be very inviting and help achieve a balance to your site. particularly when you're thinking about photographs, they can affect the whole feel of your site. They can affect the color scheme. You know, some people think, I'll think of a color scheme, and then when I'm done, I'll throw in a photograph. And your photograph has nothing to do with the color scheme. Well, the photograph is actually creating a new color scheme for you. So, you know, choose your photographs very wisely from the start. And if you're constantly updating your photographs, be careful which ones you put in there. If they don't go with your site, it's going to upset, you know, the way your site feels. You might think it's just a photograph, but it's, you know, it has a lot of information in it and a lot of color that affects your whole site. Retail sites are notorious for having a lot of images, and they kind of create a lot of visual confusion, and they kind of don't have any kind of hierarchy. Here's another one. You've probably seen things like this. And there's a lot of images here that are all telling the same story. You know, the hierarchy is not clear. You don't know what image you're supposed to look at first. I'd say you'd probably only need one of these on this whole site. So if your images are redundant, think about that. You can get rid of some of them. And here's an example where there's a strong image that focuses immediately, and you know exactly what the site's about. You don't need more than one. Here's another example. You see this image of the children. It's a pediatric site. That's all you need. You don't need, you know, 6 images of children on there. And this one too, about the police force. It's a very strong image. It makes a statement. It's the first thing you see. When you're thinking about text and images together, one can dominate or they can balance each other. And it's not like one's better than the other, but think about it. Think about how strong your image is and how strong your text is. This one, I would say the image dominates. There's text in the middle that kind of balances it, but the image is very, very strong. And again, you know exactly what the site's about as soon as you arrive there. Same here, you have a very strong image. It's just one. There's another example. So compare these to the sites we saw of the retail sites with a million different things. Which one, you know, which site is more inviting to you? Here's a site where the text dominates. You have some colored abstractions around the corners, but you're really focused just on that text. It's not really competing with anything else. Here's another example where the text is dominating on the site. So you have these peripheral images, but you kind of see them peripherally, just the way they intended. This site has, I would say, text dominating this. There's some background images, but I think there's quite a bit of text, but it's successful because it's well apportioned. It doesn't seem overwhelming. And note that the color blocks, you know, are breaking it up in a really pleasing way. So it's another example where, all right, you're forced to have a lot of information on your home page, but there's a way to make it attractive. Here's another example where text is dominating. But I think it's a little bit busy, but not too much, because there's a visual hierarchy. You can see what's you should look at first, and then second and third. Here's an example where I think you have text and images that are balancing each other very nicely. It's really, you can use icons like this, little images, to help organize your text, and it works very well on this site. Here's a site where I think the image and the text are equally weighted. And same here. Yeah, the background image is pretty overwhelming, but so is the text at the same time. So I think they're pretty well balanced. A very useful design element is white space. So that's empty space. Think of it as a design element. It's used for clarity, emphasis, focus, simplicity, and it's not always white. It's just that space that has nothing on your site. This site has no white space, and it immediately creates anxiety. Now, this is not a site, but just to drive the point home. This is a calming image here. Just one sentence with all this black white space around it. This site uses a lot of white space, leads your image to the drum, your eye to the drums. You know immediately what this site's about, and it has a calming effect. You don't have to fill up that white space. Same here. This one has some really nice clean icons and uses white space very well. I think this one, this has orange white space. I think it balances out this kind of unusual font. Because if you're using something unusual, chances are people are going to hook onto it a little longer, so you don't want to visually complicate it too much. And here's an example, Chanel, their packaging is very simplistic, uses a lot of white space. And when you're Chanel, you don't need to say anything else. So they don't. I like this because, you have no other alternative but to look at that lawnmower and follow him along the line of grass. So you're actually moving along that site. And there's a tremendous amount of white space here, but I think it's pretty nice. So balance is an important consideration. Pleases the eye and the subconscious. When things feel balanced, you're more likely to stay at the site. You can achieve balance with any of the design elements: color, images, text, and white space. Basically, you can have symmetrical and asymmetrical balance. I'm calling this symmetrical because even though there are colors at the bottom, they're balanced. You don't have one side having more color than the other. So, when I say symmetrical, it doesn't have to be mirror image, but you can use all those elements to balance one another out. I'm just blocking off those elements so you can see how balanced it is. And I just wanted to drive home, again, the point about the colors, the orange, the teal, and the gray, and, some photographs in there. Altogether, that feels balanced and pleasing to the eye. Here's another nice example of a symmetrical website. And these are the design elements, all balanced nicely. This is an asymmetrical balance, or asymmetrically balanced site, which can be more dramatic, but it can work very well. And the thing that's interesting about this, if you divide it into 4 quadrants and you just block off the design elements, if you added those blocks on the diagonal areas, they would equal each other, you see? So it's balanced. You kind of pick that up subconsciously. I think this is a nice design that's balanced. You have all these figures moving that way, and then his arms and the ball are moving the opposite direction and kind of balance it. And also the little bit of color, his uniform, the ball, and the logos in the upper right balance one another. Here's another asymmetrical site. I think the dark gray and orange at the bottom balance that band of orange at the top pretty nicely. And the bottom text is left justified, I think, balancing the screens that are more leaning to the right up there. If you're designing a site or you're thinking about how your site wants to look and this isn't clicking for you and you don't know what to do, just use blocks, and then later on you can say this block will be text, this block will be an image. As long as the images are as dense as the text, it will work. I'll talk briefly about color. This is the traditional color wheel that's been used by artists for centuries. The 3 main colors, red, yellow, blue. There are secondary colors, orange, green, and purple, and then there are tertiary colors. Printers use different systems. There's RGB, which is red, green, blue, and there's CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. Those are different systems, but I'm not going to talk about those. The reason they come with RGB is because you can't get cyan out of this wheel here, basically. So, but if you think about this as our color wheel in our conversation here, I think that's sufficient. Colors evoke emotions. We could probably do a whole presentation on this. But do you think of colors and famous logos that you know, and think about how they make you feel? You know, a lot of banks and financial institutions are blue, very calming, you know, trustworthy. You know, a lot of sporting goods things might be red and orange, vitality. You know, if you had a site for a spa, you might be using muted greens and yellows and something that's very calming. But colors do have psychological effects on people, so you have to consider that. Now, if you land at a site like this, you don't know what you're supposed to feel. I don't know. There's too many colors here. There's no scheme at all. This is, I mean, it's not a bad-looking site, but I think the color scheme is a little too much. There's like a lot of colors here. There doesn't seem to be real organization about that. The same with this site. It's using, I think, too many colors. I mean, and I was talking about the photos before. You know, there's that green in the photo is pretty strong too. So you've got green, red, orange, black, blue. You've got a lot of strong colors here, which is, you know, giving you mixed messages. So your options, you know, the easiest and most effective thing to do is just to pick one color. And you know, it always works, and it's very calming. It's very inviting. Another option is to use black in a color, and with that color you can have tints of that color. So that also is very inviting and calming, easy on the eyes. Here's another example of black and one other color, which I think works well. And another one. Notice the photo also has a lot of grays. It's just, basically this is a black and green site. If that photo had lots of other colors, it would change the site completely. This is a scheme that's complements. I have a little color wheel up in the corner. Opposite ends of the color wheel, orange and blue. So I don't know if you heard Michael's talk earlier, but you know, you have to be careful also with issues of accessibility and people who are colorblind. I know that red and green are a problem for people who are colorblind because they're of equal intensity. So you can change your site to grayscale, and if everything looks the same shade, then you probably shouldn't use those colors. Or you could make one color deeper and more saturated and one lighter, and that would work better. You could also download the little app that you plug colors in and it shows you if they meet accessibility standards. But it's worth considering that too. Another way to approach a color scheme is using colors that are close on the color wheel. So this one has sort of green, blue, yellow. They're all in that kind of lower left area of the color wheel. This one has basically the whole left side of the color wheel. We've got orange, reds down to greens. This one too, you've got reds to violets. So that one works pretty well. This one uses the primary colors, basically red, blue, yellow. This is probably more difficult to do. It's pretty striking. It's not always easy on the eyes. But if you want something that looks really energetic, it's not a bad scheme. You can make color boards if you are trying to figure out what your color scheme should be. I don't know if you know about mood boards. Mood board designers use to present a color scheme and a set of fonts and images to a client to say, you know, is this how you want your website to feel? And you could present a client with 3 or 4 of these, and they have different color schemes. They use different images, and then it helps you be on the same page about, you know, how to proceed. And you can make a simpler version just of colors and fonts. I did this for a project we're working on now. And this is a very useful thing to do before you start building this, before you start actually designing the site. You know, you talk to whoever you're designing the site for and make sure you agree on this color scheme and what fonts you're using and what color they're going to be. It'll save a lot of time down the end, because if you just start and design something and they don't like it at all. They don't like the colors, this and that. You could have talked about that early on. So it's a nice useful tool to use. So I mean that's basically it. Remember the main points I discussed: hierarchy, balance, color. I'll put in white space. Consider the user's point of view. Think about those signs I talked about early on and how they confused people. You don't want the same thing to happen to your website. And simplify and focus as much as possible. I like this image because it gives the organization of simplicity and ease of use, but it's actually very complicated. And that's the way websites often are. They can be very complicated, but they don't have to look complicated. And that's your goal when you're creating the look of your site. You want people to think it's very simple and clean and clear, even though it contains complicated information. And if you have any questions, you can always email me. You can check out our new website, and there are examples of graphic design work that I've done and illustration work too. Any questions? I know that was kind of a big overview, but that's it. Yes?
I'm curious about strategies you recommend when you have different user groups using your website for different purposes. When you're creating a hierarchy, like for a homepage, you want to get the user. Those different users may have different needs.
Mm-hmm. I would color code them. Like if you have 3 main avenues you can take, 3 main user groups, but on the home page they're all represented, use a color cue. So you might have all those 3. Use the primary colors, for example. And one group is reds, one group is blues, one group is yellows. So, and then that way, if those user groups interact on any particular site, those colors can be useful there too. So all the red pages on one page, there might be a blue element that also relates to the other user group. But colors are really strong tools to use, and I mean, you know, my favorite example is when you're approaching JFK Airport, those big signs about the different gates, they're all different colors. I think that's great, as opposed to LaGuardia, where it's just a mess. You don't know where you're going. So use colors. Any other questions or comments? Yes?
Are you going to make this presentation available?
Oh, yeah, sure. Sure, yeah. It wasn't easy to find those examples. But, yeah, I can do that. Yeah. So I did let you out early. There. Okay, thank you very much.
If anybody wants to take home pizza, there's extra pizza and go bag.